Welcome back to Wild Brews, our regular biodiversity talk show capping our Sabado nights. Ayan, and for our last episode this year, we're going to look back on the year that was with Biodiversity 2020 wrap. Ayan, at dahil Wild Brews pa din tayo, syempre may pa-brew pa rin sa atin ngayong gabi. Ayan, so Sunstoke from Nipa Brew at meron din tayong vegan food from What the Heck. Ayan. Yun, pati yung ating off-cam team ay hardworking crew ay kasali din sa pabro at salamat po. Yeah. So, I hope you're all watching us tonight and I hope you're also enjoying your own brews. At kung kahit ano man yan, pwedeng beer, pwedeng coffee or water as we wrap up our 2020. And Wild Brews is brought to you by BCSP, or the Biodiversity Conservation Society of the Philippines. We are an organization of researchers, conservation practitioners, and advocates of Philippine biodiversity. So by the way, ako nga pala si Kabil, ang host nyo ngayong gabi. At ako naman ang susubok maging moderator sa ating mga guests ngayon. I'm a wildlife biologist and a member of BCSP, and I'm currently taking my master's on natural resources conservation sa UPLB. So joining us tonight ay mga distinguished wildlife scientists and conservationists. And let's start with Dr. Rey Donne Papa, Dean of the College of Science sa UST. Siya rin ay group leader ng Zooplankton Ecology, Systematics, and Limnology Research Group of the University of Santo Tomas Research Center for the Natural and Applied Sciences. Next guest natin for tonight is Dr. Aimee Dupo from UPLB. She's a professor and a UP scientist at the Institute of Biological Sciences, College of Arts and Sciences, UPLB. She's also a UPLB Museum of Natural History's curator for moths and spiders. Our next guest is Dr. Armi Torres of Quatics. She's a postdoctoral research fellow at the Quantitative Aquatics Incorporated, or Quatics, and she's currently assisting the IUCN Freshwater Biodiversity Unit for the global assessment of the extinction risk of freshwater fishes that are native to the Philippines for the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species. And last but not the least, our next guest is Professor Philip Alviola of UPLB, Associate Professor of the Animal Biology Division, Institute of Biological Sciences, College of Arts and Sciences, UPLB, and he's also a curator of small mammals and other wildlife of the UPLB Museum of Natural History. Okay, so welcome po, Dr. Aimee, Dr. Armi, Dean Rey, at Prof. Philip. And personally, I'm really excited sa episode natin tonight. Base nga dun sa pre-prod discussion natin nung last Thursday, ang dami na natin napag-usapan. So I can't wait to share this with our audiences tonight. So game?
Game.
Alright. So, yan. Of course, ang pag-uusapan kasi natin 2020. And we started with a bang, literally. So, ang unang topic natin for tonight ay tungkol sa Taal Volcano Eruption. So, base dun sa mga pag-uusap natin last night, some of you did studies dun sa Taal Lake before and right after nung sumabog yung Taal Lake. So, ano kaya yung mga studies na to? Can you please share your studies? Let's start with Sir Dean Rey.
Well, in our case, we've been doing research on Lake Taal since 2003 pa. And hindi naman nagkaroon ng mintis ng buwan na nagkaroon kami ng sampling halos dun sa Lake Taal. Usually to collect zooplankton or fish. No? And then, yun nga, nung pumutok yung vulkan, we wanted to go back immediately. But because of safety concerns, of course, I had to consider the safety of my undergraduate and my graduate students and my RAs. And so we had to wait a while before we came back. No? But then, during our sampling trip, medyo may parang ayaw magpa-measure ng Lake Taal ng ilang mga parameters niya. No? Nagloko yung mga equipment namin, like yung CTD profiler namin, and then yung sa echo sounder namin, hindi naka-on yung naka-unlock, so hindi nag-save yung data doon sa aming echo sounder. So parang nalaman namin lahat yung mga yan, no? Tapos na yung araw and then tapos na rin yung effort. But we were able to collect some important information naman ng of course before, and then may ibang data pa rin naman kaming nakuha after. Ngayon pina-process na namin yung ilang data na yon para makagawa ng mas comprehensive na pag-aaral.
So, base dun sa mga nagawa niyong studies, sir, meron bang nagkaroon ng difference pre and post eruption?
Well, yung very stark na napansin namin, no, when we did the collection sometime early February, was that definitely there were changes in the density of the phytoplankton and zooplankton that we were able to collect in the same sampling sites that we used to visit before. So definitely yung water chemistry dun sa part ng lake na yun nag-iba, not enough for it to cause na bumaba yung density ng phytoplankton and zooplankton dun sa same area na pinagkokolektahan naman namin in the past. So that's one, no? And unfortunately nga, yun nga nagloko yung aming CTD profiler. Actually, yung pagloloko niya napiti yung batteries niya when we deployed it to a depth of 40 meters. But that CTD profiler works well even into depths na maabot ng 120 meters in the past. Okay. So nagtaka kami bakit ganun yung nangyari, no? And that would have yielded very important information. Ano ba yung DO profile nung lake nung time na yon, ano yung pH, ano yung temperature, and conductivity, no? So sayang hindi namin na measure yung mga na yon, parameters na yon. Pero yun, yung nakolekta namin, we're doing fatty acid analysis dun sa mga samples ng zooplankton na nakolekta namin. So meron kaming data from before and after nun na yun, we're in the process of analyzing those samples.
So sir, para lang sa mga audiences natin na wala masyadong background sa biology or nakalimutan na nila yung high school biology niya, pwede ba kaya natin pa-explain ko ano yung mga phytoplanktons na sinasabi natin at zooplanktons at paano siya nakaka-apekto dun sa sa biodiversity ng Taal Lake?
Okay, yung plankton kasi is a collective term for organisms that would be found in the water column, but they are very weak that they cannot swim independently of the currents. Okay, so it could be viruses, bacteria, algae or plant materials, and then hayop, no, zooplankton. So yung phytoplankton, which is yung plant component ng mga planktonic communities, no, they serve as primary producers. Sila yung taga photosynthesize. Sila yung main na nagpo-photosynthesize in an aquatic environment. And then, yung zooplankton naman, yung mga maliliit na hayop na kumakain din ng mga phytoplankton na yon. And then yung isda, na syempre mas kilala natin ng mga sa mga aquatic ecosystems, no, isda. Yung mga ibang isda at yung mga ibang batang isda, nakarely sila sa phytoplankton and zooplankton for their food source. And so kung hindi stable or hindi maayos ang situation ng planktonic community ng isang freshwater or isang marine ecosystem, definitely it will have an effect dun sa higher members ng food web. No? Aabot yan hanggang tao eventually. So kaya yun yung inaaral namin. But they're microscopic, so yun.
So what you're saying is yung phytoplankton na nakikita dun sa Taal Lake ay may epekto din eventually sa terrestrial ecosystem at eventually sa mga tao. Tama
yes,
po ba, sir?
Definitely.
Okay. So, si Doc Aimee, since nabanggit na natin yung effect niya, possible effect na mag-cascade sa terrestrial environment, as I understand, si Doc Aimee may mga studies din na ginawa sa may paligid ng Taal Lake before and after no eruption. Pwede niyo po bang i-share yung mga work niyo on the invertebrates na nakita after the eruption?
Yun naman sa amin, it's mostly in Mount Makiling, just adjacent to Batangas. So if you notice yung ashfall reached as far as Los Baños, so at least a day after. So when we were allowed to go out, kasi umaakyat-akyat kami on a weekly basis, mostly for fitness. Tapos, on the side na lang yung pagdo-document ng arthropods. But we wanted to know din kung paano yung naging effect ng ashfall sa mga arthropods. So we took some photos of some of these. Ayun nga, meron tayong picture ng moth. Itong nakikita nyo ngayon sa screen. So this is a tusok moth na partly, we're not really exactly sure kung ang kinamatay niya would be ashfall. Pero tingin namin kasi baka heavily laden siya ng ashfall. Hindi na rin siya masyadong makalipad. But on the next photo, you would see another moth that has been newly emerged. Endemic species to sa atin na thriving naman siya. So we were noticing na astonishingly, the arthropods were very much resilient kasi may capability sila na magtago sa ilalim ng dahon, sa leaf litter. So napakinabangan nila yung forest understory to protect themselves against the ashfall. So yun yung mga initial observations namin. Kasi tingnan namin kung ano ba yung effect. Pero for the most part, sa arthropods, very, very resilient sila.
I see. So that's good to hear. At least may mga naka-survive at naka-adapt nung nagkaroon ng ashfall. So imagine umabot din ng Los Baños. So ang lawak ng effect pala nung Taal eruption. So balik lang tayo dun sa Taal Lake kanina. May mga endemic species na kasi na makikita lang doon sa Taal Lake. May mga idea po ba kayo kung ano pong nangyari doon sa mga endemic species? Are they still there? Nag-survive ba sila?
Post-eruption, wala naman kaming narinig so far na bad news for Sardinella tawilis, no? Actually, even for the Lake Taal sea snake, yung Hydrophis semperi, which is also another endemic species found in Lake Taal, wala namang bad news on those, no?
That's good.
Mas nakakasama pa nga ang tao sa kanila kung tutuusin. Kasi ang Taal naman is known to be a decade volcano, no? Madalas siya nag-erupt in the past. Ito lang yung medyo mahabang interval ng eruption niya, no? From the 1970s, tapos ngayon lang 2020 nag-erupt ulit. Ito yung isa sa mga pinakamatagal na intervals ng eruption niya. Pero yung before, wala namang nangyayari na nanonote na masamang epekto sa biodiversity ng lake yung eruptions, no? Pero yung tao, yung impact from anthropogenic sources mas nakasama pa sa Lake Taal kasi nung nagsimula yung introduction ng mga non-native species, doon nagkaroon siya ng nakakita kami ng may alterations na nagaganap, no? Yung intensive fishing practices na yung iba pinagbabawal na ngayon, no, definitely had a hand in the decline of the population of these endemic species, no? The tawilis, of course, has been declared as a endangered species, no, last year. And so this was very bad news, no, for us in the freshwater biology community.
So that's good to hear naman po na at least safe pa rin yung mga endemics kahit nagkaroon ng natural disaster dun sa Taal Lake. So tanong ko lang si Prof Philip. So asan po kayo nung panahon na sumabog yung Taal Lake? What kind of research were you doing at that time? At naapektuhan po ba yung research nyo nung sumabog yung Taal, considering na malapit lang yung UPLB dun sa area?
Nasa bahay lang naman ako during that time. I believe it was during the weekend. It was Sunday, I believe. So wala naman. Just mending lang kung anong mangyayari sa bahay, getting the face mask, parang prelude to what will happen next, So talaga nagkaroon ng parang hoarding ng face mask. It was very important. Parang it's a prelude nga, foreshadowing of something even more sinister to happen. But we're supposed to be, may mga naka-line up na ng mga field work going then during the start of the year in January. So some of these would be doing my cave research in Polillo. So specifically, I work on bats, looking into the diversity of these bats in dwelling in caves. So so here this picture actually ito yung ginagawa namin. So pumapasok kami sa kuweba. So this was in 2009. So I've been doing cave research on bats since 2008 or 2009. During that time, it was still in its infancy, yung biospeleology. So halos wala pa nagre-research na nung panahon na yan eh. Well, it's a great thing that 10 years after, so marami na tayong publications on caves, not just on bats. So yung ginagawa namin dito, so we have trapping paraphernalia called the mist net. So inilalagay namin ito sa mga poles. So nakikita niyo yung dalawang manong kasama nung nakasombrero. So may mga kahoy yan, pole, mga ano. Tapos dyan namin kinakabit yung mist net. Then papasok mo sa kuweba. And then, yun, lilipad yung mga panike and then mahuli yan sa mga mist net. So huli namin siya. Titingnan namin kung ano bang species ng mga ito. And then for Polillo, we surveyed at around mga 25 caves all in all. So, merong mga mahaba, around 300 meters in length. Meron din mga maikse. And then, we also documented some very, very cool species, particularly yung Hypsideros coronatus. Michelle, if you can show yeah, that's the one. Yeah. So this one, Hypsideros coronatus, leaf-nosed bat. Hindi siya kamag-anak ng mga rhinolophids, mga leaf-nosed bats na ano. So this horseshoe bat, so Hypsideros coronatus, was first discovered in 1871 sa Agusan, and it hasn't been found ever since. So it's known only from the type locality, from a single specimen, and then in 2009, after 130 or 120 plus years, so we found that thriving, actually there's a thriving colony of this very enigmatic, very rare species here. So ang ganda. It was one of the highlights of our research sa Polillo. And then of course part of documenting yung mga diversity of bats, of course, would be also documenting kung ano ba yung mga usage or disturbances that are happening inside of these caves. So there, of course, alam na naman natin people would go to the caves to gather guano, magmuha ng mga swiftlet nest, so for food, for delicacy. And of course, treasure hunting. A lot of the caves all over the Philippines have been visited by several people looking into treasure that was supposed to be left by the Japanese during the World War II. So marami dyan eh. So dito, as you can see the picture, napaka-welcome pa. So welcome, hunter, treasure. So baliktad pa. No? So, well, so maraming taong tatanong din sa amin. Kasi marami rin kayong napuntang kuweba, marami na rin kayong napuntang mga lugar. Laging inaakala sa amin is nagte-treasure hunting pa kami. So gano'n, mayaman pa. So,
actually, common yan
eh. Diba?
Common yan sa wildlife work eh.
Every one of my colleagues here would definitely agree, have their experiences with this, na ilan yung mga treasure na nakuha, tapos they would view us very suspiciously na baka naka-jackpot na itong mga to. So, but these activities, like for example, treasure hunting, just very prevalent all over the country, has may mga epekto na nangyari. Let's say, for example, drop in the mortality ng mga bats. Kasi nadidisturbo sila or they abandon the caves themselves. So dahil dito sa mga activities na to.
Since na open mo na rin yung topic sa bats, sir, at ang madalas na sinisisi ngayon kung bakit tayo naka-lockdown ay mga bats. So sila daw or bats ang main origin ng coronavirus. Can you give us a short intro lang kung paano ba nangyari yon, na paano nila nasabi or paano nasabi ng mga scientists na nanggaling sa bats yung coronavirus, considering na ang pag-transfer ngayon ay from person to person. So can you give us a background, sir?
Well, it all started even with the Ebola virus, the Marburg virus, Ebola Zaire virus back in the 70s and to the early 80s. It has been also identified that yung bats siguro would be the reservoir of this highly pathogenic disease. And then, of course, marami pag-aaral by the virologists, veterinarians. They have documented over 10,000 kinds of viruses in bats. So napakadami. Ang daming mga virus. And then, at the start of the 21st century, in 2002, we have the SARS, the first SARS, which originated in China and then managed to spread all over the world and turned into a pandemic, resulted to about more than 8,000 cases with 10% fatality rate. So na-identify ng mga virologists back then the reservoir or the nearest na relative nung virus na would be the bats. And then of course with the MERS-CoV, the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, na nangyari in 2010 to 2012, I believe. So it was believed that data would show na the bats as well would be the reservoir of the MERS-CoV. And then yung ngayon na nangyayari, the SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19, nakita nila because the Chinese virologists have and wildlife biologists have been, because of the SARS in 2002, have been doing virology surveys in bats. So nakita nila, so na-sequence nila yung COVID-19, yung SARS-CoV-2, and then they found a 96% similarity with a coronavirus that was found in Rhinolophus affinis, 96%. So, makikita na similar, but they're still significantly different from each other. So that alone, yung high degree of similarity, and which na-attribute to bats in general, yung mga sakit. And then of course, nagkaroon ng lost in translation na baka yung paniki mismo yung kumagat sa tao or ano man nangyari, may direktang nagkaroon ng transmission from bats to humans. So that's why it has been vilified yung paniki because of that.
So i-clear lang natin, sir, hindi nanggaling mismo sa bats.
Hindi
kinagat, parang vampira, hindi kinagat ng isang bata.
There's no circumstantial evidence to support na nagkaroon ng direct transmission from the bats to humans. Wala din. And the SARS-CoV-2 that is found in humans is different from the nearest relative that's found in a horseshoe bat. 96% difference. Actually, nangyari is the SARS-CoV-2 is not directly related to the Rhinolophus affinis coronavirus, but they do have a common ancestor.
Okay.
They do based on the recent research. Ang daming research na lumalabas eh. Sobrang daming lumalabas ng mga research from in Nature, in PLOS ONE, in PNAS, na they're really scrutinizing the epidemiology, the source, the virology of this virus.
Yeah, since nabanggit mo na na-vilify nga yung bats kasi nga ang laki nung percentage ng genetic material na similarity between the existing coronavirus or yung nagko-cause ng SARS-CoV ngayon, tapos yung nakita dun sa Rhinolophus affinis, would you think na dun sa vilification ng bats, potential kaya na magkaroon ng extinction ng certain species ng bats kasi nga na-vilify sila, magkakaroon ba ng mass culling dahil nga dun sa misinformation?
It is a definite possibility. It's a very dangerous possibility that could happen actually. But what we're seeing right now is maraming mga conservation groups, even our government, are very adamant in saying that the bats are not to blame. They're very adamant, not only here in the Philippines but all over the world. There's a global consensus among biologists, conservationists, policy leaders that says na the bats are not to blame for the pandemic that's happening. And I'm not so sure, but in the Philippines, we're not seeing this kind of massive culling. Yung massive na talagang all scorched earth na pagbatay dito sa mga panig. Which is a great thing. That's good, actually. And the simplest na talagang sinuggest din talaga ng WHO, the different conservation group, our Philippine government is stay away from bats lang. That's the easiest way to preempt lang talaga yung
So that's good. So hindi pala
That's great.
That's good na yun, wala pang mass culling at hindi siya mag-lead sa extinction. So punta naman tayo sa medyo bad news. So may recent study na lumabas or recent assessment na lumabas na this fourth quarter of 2020 na nilabas yung Red List version 2020 version 3 at headlines na lumalabas sa news ay maraming na-extinct na freshwater species na makikita sa Lake Lanao. So we have here Dr. Armi na pwedeng mag-share nung research niya kasi siya yung isa sa mga contributor na nag-aral at patunay na hindi na nakikita yung mga species na yun?
Yeah, actually, yung recent release ng IUCN, parang 31 species are extinct, are already considered extinct, and almost 50% ay nanggagaling sa Lake Lanao. So we were able to assess the threatened status of the 17 endemic species, and out of the 17, 15 are now extinct. 15, and there are only 2
Dalawa lang.
remaining na critically endangered, and I think it's possibly extinct na rin sila. So that's it. So ang natitira na lang ay si Barbodes lindog and Barbodes sirang. Those 2 are one of the most abundant species in Lake Lanao before. So ngayon din wala na din. Nag-sample kami ng 2016 to 2017, and wala na talaga rin nakikita sa single individual of these species.
So itong mga species pong na to, endemic lang to sa Lake Lanao, no? Ibig sabihin, hindi ko makikita sa ibang
they're
parte
only
ng
found in Lake Lanao, 17 of them, and then they are used to be common in Lake Lanao, and yung yung lindog and sirang, yung we declare it as possibly extinct, yun yung pinaka-common parang kumbaga ilang metric tons ang nakukuha, tapos parang mga 20s, I think parang last seen sila 2008, oo. So, tapos meron ding mga sinasabi din ng mga fishermen na meron pa silang nakikitang ilang peraso, yung mga ganun. So, may chance pa, possibly extinct means they are likely to be extinct, pero there is still a small chance na buhay pa sila, na extant pa sila. So
considering nga ma'am na wala silang ibang mapupuntahan kasi isolated yung lake, hindi sila makakapunta sa ibang water bodies. Ano kaya yung main reason kung bakit sila na-extinct?
Because based on ng mga evidences, talagang ang main talaga driver of extinction is the invasive alien species. Yung nagkaroon kasi ng parang 2 biological invasion waves sa Lake Lanao. Yung una na accidentally introduced yung isang goby. Tapos nung napasok siya, merong habang nag-increase yung abundance niya, meron ding decrease ng ng mga endemic species. Then after mga 1960s yun, was 1970s naman, early 1970s, meron na namang ibang pumasok. Ito yung yung Eliotrid naman, parang Giris margaritaceae. And ganun din, parang dalawang invasive species ay exerting pressures together sa mga endemic species, tapos compounded pa with overfishing, merong may mga illegal the use of destructive fishing, meron pang issue na na nag-decrease yung water level ng Lake Lanao due to di ba ginagalang kung for everybody's information, Lake Lanao is parang major source siya ng parang yung sa generation ng yung water, major source siya for hydro water plant. So ang nagsusupply sila ng majority of the electricity needs of the entire Mindanao. Yung yun ang gamit ng major gamit ng Lake Lanao. So yun, so that's it. We lost the 15 endemic.
Oo nga, nakakalungkot nga yun. So, to drive home the point lang siguro, yung extinct kasi hindi mo na mababalik yun
hindi na. But there's, and I hope we will focus yung, there's still two species to be saved. Naniniwala ako na baka there's still chance. So, kailangan sana nakafocus yung natin. More funding for Lake Lanao Tribe, we will save the 2 remaining.
Oo. So, yan. Kailangan na talaga natin i-prevent yung mga...
Ang problem kasi sa Lake Lanao, kaya sila napababayaan. Later, actually, we will discuss later, yung mga challenges ay... merong talaga, parang crisis ang yung peace and order sa Lake Lanao. So, wala talagang to conduct studies in Lake Lanao is quite risky or very risky, parang ganun. It's not lang quite, it's It's really risky.
Yun. So, mapag-uusapan natin mamaya yung mga challenges. Okay. So, ayun, puro sad news galing sa Taal eruption, sa zoonosis, tas napunta tayo dun sa extinction. Punta naman tayo sa good news for 2020. Ayan. So, as I understand, si Doc Aimee ay may mga exciting species na na-discover this 2020. So, can you please share the species that you recently discovered at what it means to the Philippines?
For 2020, meron tayong mga recent species of jumping spiders, tatlo yon from South Luzon. And because nga hindi tayo nakakalabas ngayon, very limited ang field work, yung lahat ng nakolekta pa namin backlog that is going to be described would be coming out. Even yung ating matagal ng tapos na siya, hindi ko pa lang siya talaga na ipapadala sa printing press, but we will be coming up with pictorial field guide on spiders. Uunahin natin yung mga orb weavers, yung gumagawa ng sapot na bilog before other families kasi isa siya sa pinakamalalaking family ng spider. So yung mga orb weavers, kasi pag nag-drawing tayo ng spider, di ba, idodrawing natin siya na pabilog, may web. Hindi lahat kasi ng spiders ganon. So yung pabilog na web, yun yung mga orb weavers. Kaya orb, bilugan siya. And because we cannot do it alone, kasi hindi lang naman spiders ang pinag-aaralan ko. So, ayun nga yung problema. Kasi sa araw, mangongolekta ka ng spiders. Sa gabi naman, mga moths naman ang inaatupag ko. So, yung the limitations of doing field work, isang benefit nun is mababalikan ko lahat ng mga backlog kong collections. Itong mga nasa likod yan. Lahat yan dapat trabahuhin na. Yan yung mga backlog ko. So, ito yung mga pwede pang gawin along with being trapped inside of the house.
Magandang nangyari nung lockdown, isang good news, nagkaroon ng time for yung mga researchers to write their material, their manuscripts. Kasi nga yun, lockdown, hindi ka makakagawa ng fieldwork. Madalas mas masaya mag fieldwork, kaya nagkakaroon ng backlog sa writing. So, alright.
Pero nakaka-cabin fever, di ba? I think pare-pareho kami na naramdaman na being trapped inside the house, di ka na magkanda o gaga sa boredom. Yung kasi sanay ka naman talagang nasa labas. It's one of the difficult things of being in quarantine or being inside of the house. Kaya nga tayo naging field biologist, hindi talaga tayo mapaupo sa isang pwesto. Di ba po?
Okay. So ayan, so that ends our first segment. Meron po ba kayong mga gustong i-announce na mga upcoming researches nyo before we go to the next segment?
Upcoming, we'll continue with the Lake Taal studies. We received good news from NRCP, for instance, that our Taal Eruption Ecological Research Program has been approved for funding ng NRCP. So that means that by January, maitutuloy namin yung mga observations namin sa Lake Taal. We'll be focusing on two key species, Sardinella tawinis, and also for the limnetic ecosystem. And then for the littoral, we'll be focusing on Glossogobius guris. So food web analysis, etc. So yun, that's something we're looking forward to this 2021. Kaya hopefully mag-ease na yung mga restrictions para mas madali kaming makakapunta ng Lake Taal. Kasi yun. Tsaka kukuha na rin kami ng RFID para hindi na mahirap sa fieldwork. Kasi galing kami ng NCR. So yun.
So, punta na po tayo sa challenges siguro since nabanggit na isang challenge yung pag-travel restrictions sa paggawa natin ng mga researches natin. So, can you please share, sino pong gusto maunang mag-share ng difficulties na harap natin ngayong pandemic? Kasi nga, nagkaroon ng lockdown, ano yung mga naging effects sa ating mga research work? So, who would like to share first?
Ako na muna.
Sige po.
Sige. So, one of the biggest challenges na being restricted, kasi when you're working with living organisms, definitely they're mobile. So, you have to follow them around. So, yun nga, yung isang challenge talaga of being locked in is that you develop some sort of cabin fever. na yun nga, yung ultimo mga insekto sa garden ko, pinapatos ko na sila, tinitingnan ko na sila, I've been observing them keenly. Pero ito yung blue-banded bees. So sometimes my husband buys me a lot of plants just for the sake of attracting more insects para may maobserbahan ako. And I unlocked a skill na magaling pala ako magkuha using my mobile camera. So ito yung blue-banded bees, I observe what time of the day sila lumalabas in between the asynchronous classes. Ano yung behavior na ginagawa nila, ilang seconds sila nagsistay sa isang bulaklak. So I was so trapped inside of my house. Na-observe ko na yung mga insects that are trying to feed on plants. So, naging kachikan ko na madalas dyan ay mga plantito, plantita, magtatanong sila, anong kumakain ng basil ko? Anong insekto to? Bakit nauubos ng aking mga petchay na itinanim? Kasi remember, during the lockdown, halos lahat nag-home gardening, naging
Oo,
plantito.
nagtanim na.
So, napupuno yung inbox ko ng mga queries, ano daw yung umubos, kontrabida ba to, bida pa to, like this one, ito is breaking ECQ, this is a millibug, na Fericia ang genus niya, yung nasa likod niya is another species of millibug, so they were breaking physical distancing kasi magkalapit sila masyado. Nandun din siya sa isang weed sa garden. Yung isa naman, pagdating sa calamansi, kasi since nag-lockdown around April, March, marami pang nangingitlog ng mga butterflies noon. So in this case, habang nagsasampay ako ng labada, kinunan ko yan na nangingitlog sa may bud siya. Doon pala sila mahilig mangitlog sa may bud ng calamansi. Para isang itlog lang per bud. Para pag nag-emerge siya, tigi-tigisa sila ng buffet. So, gano'n na, wala na ako ng social life. Ultimo, yung calamansi ko, no-observe ko na siya. Naging masyado kong aware sa mga arthropods sa bahay. And we also came up with an entomology of the time of COVID materials na we published it sa social media and shared it with the plantitos and plantitas para they could do the identification work themselves.
Yung mga sino mga kaibigan at mga hindi kaibigan ng mga
insekto. Paano sila tatanggalin sa garden nyo pag ayaw nyo sila magstay doon. So may mga tips na rin.
Ayan. So since nabanggit nyo na rin po yung tungkol dun sa mga arthropods na nakita nyo habang naka-lockdown, tingin nyo po ba meron pa rin po bang nangyayaring illegal trade habang sa mga arthropods sa mga invertebrates nung mga panahon ng lockdown?
Actually, marami dahil since most people are online, mas mataas ang communication rates, exchanges. Pero ang isa din namang benefit is because people were inside of their homes, yung mga derby spiders for instance, hindi sila nakokolekta basta-basta sa labas. Kasi dati, basta pumalo ng August to December, you'd be seeing people with flashlights lumalabas sa gabi collecting these spiders kasi ito na yung season ng mga palaban. Pero dahil may quarantine, highly restricted ang movement ng tao, now we're finding them again in the forest. Yung mga recent akyat namin, nakikita namin sila na they're starting to thrive again. Hindi katulad nung last year, halos wala kami makitang ganyan sa field or kung meron man, ang liliit. Ngayon, they're bigger now. And it's a positive take din kasi that means meron tayong mga predators to control our mosquitoes. Medyo bababa din yung dengue sa atin kasi meron tayong mga spiders to do that for us.
So that's good. So yun, actually guilty din ako dyan. Nung bata din ako, madalas din ako kumuha ng gagamba, pumunta sa gubat, kumuha ng gagamba, tapos panabong namin. So, ayun. Okay. So, ayan. So, yun yung mga kasi yung mga good news pala, hindi kahit pala dahil pala sa lockdown ay nabawasan. Usually kasi mga bata or mga matatanda yung kumukuha ng mga derby derby spiders. Okay. So, matanong ko lang, balik lang ako kay Dean Rey. Nung kakatapos lang ba nung Taal eruption, nagkaroon ba kailan yung next na fieldwork na inalaw na kayong bumalik? At ano yung mga challenges nun? Naka-PPE ba kayo nun?
No, 2 weeks ago, may photos nung fieldwork namin 2 weeks ago wherein we joined this expedition organized by Faith Colleges Tanawan together with some fellow scientists from UP Diliman and then members of our team. So we were able to visit well, kami yung aquatic team, no? Nandun kami sa boat most of the time. Pero yan, we got to see the up close yung Volcano Island. But our colleagues working on terrestrial, nakapunta naman sila, nakasampa sila dun sa island mismo and did some preliminary observations. But indeed, naka-face mask ka all the time except when eating. Maganda kasi nasa labas kayo, maglayo-layo lang kayo, no? Okay na. Pero yung face shield din, pagka medyo magkakalapit kayo, kailangan nakasuot din siya. Pero pag mabilis yung andar nung bangka, syempre hindi uubra yung face shield mo, no? Hahanginin at hahanginin. So we had to remove them. Pero naka-mask pa rin kami. And I think this will be, ganyan na magiging itsura namin sa fieldwork until such time na may vaccine na. So, itong Enero onwards, no, malamang, lalo na pag mas mainit na yung panahon, mas hindi siya comfortable, no, mag-field. Pero, dahil miss na namin mag-fieldwork, okay na rin, no? We'll follow the precautions set by government and health officials, no? Basta maka-start na kami ng fieldwork. Para lang din, kasi masyado nang matagal yung intervals ng observation namin. We might be missing on some very interesting data already. So, kailangan na namin talagang tignan and then sana mas regular na kaming makalabas. Kasi 9 months interval between samplings, no, right after the eruption, medyo matagal masyado yun. May out kami definitely na data doon. So, yun.
So, yeah. So yung lockdown lang talaga, sir, yung nung yung simula nung new normal na pag mag-fieldwork ka, laging naka-face mask, naka-face shield. Pero before, hindi naman ganun yung
If you look at our other fieldwork photos, no, yung mga nagsasampling kami sa Seven Lakes o the usual fieldwork attire naman yung suot namin with our usual equipment. Pero ngayon, we envision that face shields and face masks will have to be put on in order for us to ensure the safety of all our team members then, as well as yung mga members ng community na nakakahalubilo namin during fieldwork.
Siyempre, safety first pa rin tayo sa new normal. So, ayan, since nasa topic na tayo ng PPE, knowing na zoonotic nga pala ang coronavirus at yung SARS-CoV virus na nag-cause ng COVID-19. So, tanong naman natin si Professor Philip, kung ganun ba, beforehand, bago ba nag-pandemic, paano ba mag-fieldwork ang mga tao nag-handle ng bats? At may pagbabago ba eventually nung nagka-pandemic?
It was a gradual process. Actually, we started we started our work in 2007. So nung panahon na yun, kasi hindi naman kami sanay sa gloves, paghawak ng panike, may gloves. Hindi kami sanay sa mga ganun, yung mga face mask. No, medyo mga sutil kami, even our Japanese virologists as well. So walang sense of urgency. So we know theoretically in the back of our mind that this can be a ground zero event for transmission or spillover. Pero as biologists, wala nakakagat kami ng panike. Hindi ko na mabilang sa tanang buhay ko bilang biologist ko ilang beses na ako nakagat ng panike sa kamay, sa dibdib. So many things.
Actually, minsan nakakabutas pa nga ng kuko eh.
Oh yeah, hell yeah. I mean, we've been peed upon, crapped upon, yung mga ganun pagpapasa sa kuweba. But of course, with onset ng SARS ng 2002, even with MERS-CoV, so medyo nagbago na kami. Medyo naging model researchers na kami. So yung mga, even a few days before the lockdown in the early days of March, so we went to Biak na Bato to do a virology study there. And so we found some very interesting virus actually. So it's not yet being published, so pinag-aaral pa. One interesting virus was yung pox virus. Pox virus, mga relatives ito would be your smallpox, which was responsible for the decimation of the Native Americans back in the Middle Ages or in the 14th century. So we found a relative then. It's so far it's published it will be the first record of a pox virus in Asia for the whole for Asia. So yeah, so and they actually manifest itong pox virus. They actually manifest sa mga paniki with wings. Makikita mo may mga lesions, may mga rashes. So it's the first time din halos na because previously lang alam natin yung mga viruses na nakikita sa paniki, they don't manifest pathologically dun sa paniki mismo. So apparently they're immune to that. Pero yun nga, nangyayari sa pagka nagkaroon ng spillover. But what we're seeing here is that merong lesions na nangyayari sa paniki themselves. And of course, parang mga nana or mga rashes. So it can be debilitating. Para sa tao din, it can be debilitating to the bat itself. Of course, yung aming safety precautions, so we would wear PPEs, especially in the, kasi yung lab namin is nasa field din. So pagkahuli namin ng mga panike, yan, like for example, in this picture, so pagkahuli namin ng panike, so kukuha na namin sila ng plasma, ng blood, fecal material, oral and anal swabbing, and then of course for the some bats na meron kaming permit to collect, so kinukuhanan din namin ng mga internal organs. So yan, so may hairnet kami, may face shield, may gloves.
And so itong picture na to, sir, was this before the pandemic or after the lockdowns?
Before the lockdown. So mga 1 week before the lockdown. So yan, nag-ano na kami. Although meron na kasing reports sa Pilipinas na yata during
early February.
Early February in Cebu, I believe. And of course, it's been spreading na in China. So this was the simula pala. So yun, we would wear this mga parang ano ba, mga precautionary, may hairnet pa sa tanang buhay ko, hindi pa ako nakapagsuot ng ganyan. Kalbo kasi di ba? Wala namang pagsusuotan So we were forced to wear that. Of course, parang to err in the side of caution. Ayan, one very notable example, parang na rin kaming mga astronaut parang sa mga gamitan. So this is a full body PPE sa Tyvek suit. So may parang may konting ventilation ano pa nga yan So in the next, supposed to be dapat babalik kami pupunta sana kami ng last June sa Sultan Kudarat. So this Sultan Kudarat was the ground zero for the acute encephalitis outbreak that happened in 2014. And it was traced to Henipa virus. Henipa virus is one of the deadliest known virus known to man. Actually, mangyari may 10 na namatay because of eating horses. And then within a span of 10 days or 9 days, nagkandamatayan na. So nangyari doon is kumain sila ng parang infected na horse meat. And then yung may mga health workers na nag-tend doon sa mga nagkasakit, namatay din. And it wasn't really given much media traction back then. So ang ano doon ay acute encephalitis, but they did not identify it as zoonotic. And yun na nga, na-isolate it was a Henipa virus. And so far before that, ang mga records ng Henipa virus would be in Australia and Malaysia. Associated that there was a parang intermediate host. So for Australia, it was the horses. In Malaysia, it was the pigs. So sa Pilipinas, it was the horses as well. So yung balak sana namin gawin nung June was to go there para to look at the ground zero, para to see kung yung Henipa virus ba is tingnan sa panike kung meron sila. And sayang, and then of course we have several proposals na naka-inline to look into coronaviruses as well, prevalence niya sa buong Pilipinas, kung titinan. So hopefully matuloy on this coming 2021. Because we did a survey before, back in 2012, about coronavirus in Southern Tagalog region. So we sampled bats in Atimonan, in Mount Makiling, in even in Diliman. So we found this picture. So we did a genomic and serological detection. So genome, kung merong evidence, and serology, if there's exposure or may antibody reacting dun sa mga virus for coronavirus. And nakita namin medyo mataas yung prevalence, overall prevalence. So serology, so ibig sabihin nito 66% or 2 out of 3 bats to captured were exposed to coronavirus at some point. So may history sila na exposure. And then for genomic evidence, so 30% of the bats that we captured have coronavirus. So our proposals in the coming months or years, hopefully in the early 2021, is to document. We will do this in a nationwide scale and try to see kung sino ba yung mga lugar sa Pilipinas ang baka susceptible. Magkakaroon kami ng risk factor analysis. Sino ba yung mga susceptible for magkakaroon ng spillover ng coronavirus to humans. So sana matuloy.
I see. So, may mga studies sir na nagli-link sa sa illegal trade tapos sa spread ng zoonotic diseases. Would you be familiar kung sa bats ba meron bang ganun na mga observations na may illegally traded na na meat from bats at naging source ng isang zoonotic disease?
So bushmeat. Bushmeat. Well, there are anecdotal accounts about Ebola, Zaire virus in Africa, and then Marburg, so which probably started with bushmeat hunting. With the case of coronavirus in Wuhan, hindi pa rin din talaga alam. So some say it started in the wet market in Wuhan, but apparently evidence would point na nagkaroon na ng cases ng coronavirus even that's not connected with the Wuhan market. It predated yung nangyari sa Wuhan. So ibig sabihin, probably the virus was already circulating even before the Wuhan incident, probably during the November or December. And what is very interesting is that na sinabi ko na nga kanina na yung the SARS-CoV-2 is not directly parang descendant nung back coronavirus, but there's a common ancestor. And what's interesting is that probably they've diverged. The known SARS-CoV-2 and the bat coronavirus, they diverged sometime between 1948 to 1982. So you see, Ben, it's been circulating now, this SARS-CoV-2 for the last, 30 or 40 years at the very least. And di natin alam. So baka nagkakaroon na yata ng localized infection sa mga very remote areas that did not have that nakapag-transmit sa mga malalaking areas, mga high population centers. So very localized. So na hindi natin alam. And this could happen in the Philippines as well. So yung mga hindi natin alam na baka yung mga definitely we found coronavirus in bats here in the Philippines, among other several viruses as well. And it can happen
It's possible.
Pwede magkaroon ng spillover, pwede magkaroon ng amplification, or pwede magkaroon ng recombination or what have you. So it is entirely possible na mangyayari yan.
I see. Okay. So, ayan, since na-discuss na natin yung sa illegal trade sa terrestrial ecosystem, punta naman tayo sa freshwater ecosystem. Sa tingin niyo, Miss Dr. Armi, dun sa Lake Lanao, meron bang ganong issues ng illegal trade ng freshwater species?
Wala na kasi wala na nang isi-trade. Pero right now yung Lake Lanao is invaded by invasive alien species. Wala na siyang endemic, ang natira na lang doon merong Barbodes tumba. Endemic din siya sa Philippines. We thought endemic na siya sa Lake Lanao, hindi pala eh. Meron pala siyang nakikita pala siya sa different tributaries ng Lake Lanao. Pero hindi talaga siya main species. So nakikita siya sa gilid na lang siya ng Lake Lanao. Pero dati it used to be abundant kahit nasa gilid lang siya ng Lake Lanao. Abundant siya, pero yung invasive species na to ay nakakain pa rin sila as in na sabi ng mga fishermen dati marami ngayon, rarely na nila makikita. So pati yun pinapatulan kasi yung Iliotrib nakakapasok siya sa lake at saka sa rivers eh. So medyo wide ranging yung yung distribution niya. So walang isyung ganun sa pero yung mga endemic species na yan, red listed na yan, di ba? So, ang natin, dapat bawal na ang hulihin eh. Bawal i-catch, bawal i-benta. Hanggang ngayon, yung tumba, pa rin siya eh, binibenta pa rin siya eh. Per piece, parang 10 pesos per piece, parang ganun. So, hindi na trickle down yung natin, yung mga batas natin sa to the barangay, to the community level. Hindi alam ng, ako nga personally, una parang nakaligtaan ko yun na, ano pala to? So, kailangan pa rin humingi ng permit, so ganun. So, yung mga locals, hindi nila alam na bawal, hulihin yung mga threatened species.
I see.
So, wala issue. Ang issue lang talaga ay, wala, invaded na yung Lake Tanaw ng invasive species. Yeah.
So when we say ma'am na invasive species, isa lang ba itong invasive species na to? Marami nang na-introduce na invasive species?
Actually, sa namin, sa survey namin, 10 species yung nakikita namin sa Lake Lanao. Kasama na yung tumba na nakikita lang sa side ng Lake Lanao. The rest na 9 species are all introduced species. Wala na siyang native na nakikita. Pero based on historical data, dapat merong 24 native species sa Lake Lanao. Based sa documents sa fish base, sa mga currents data, talagang dapat 24 ang native species. Sa ngayon, 10 na lang siya, including yung sabi ko na sa tabi-tabi na lang ng Lake Lanao. Pero na pa rin siya na impacted pa rin siya ng invasive species.
I see. So punta po tayo sa sa Taal Lake. Dean Rey, meron din po bang mga invasive species sa Taal Lake at paano kaya niya naapektuhan yung mga endemics naman doon?
Well, actually generally in all freshwater ecosystems, talagang big challenge ang invasive species. And isa siya sa mga ecosystems na pinaka very susceptible, no? Kasi nga well, with Lake Taal, aquaculture of course is a big issue. So ang mga ginagamit naman for aquaculture doon, Amoriochromis nauticus, which is non-native in the Philippines, and is widely suspected to be invasive na rin naman, no? Hindi lang siya basta non-native, no? Nandun sa category ng invasive. And then of course, meron na rin mga habitat displacement na nagaganap because of that. And then for other lakes then similar ang situation, no? Pero let's just say na some other lakes would be mas malala yung problem nila because of let's say the janitor fish or the knife fish, no, na malaking issue with Laguna de Bay. Pero ang invasives hindi lang yung mga nakikita ha. Siyempre yung naaral ni Armi yung mga isda nakikita. Pero one of the big highlights of our research group is discovering that even among plankton there are invasive species of plankton that have already displaced native and or endemic species. Balik ko lang sa Lake Lanao, no, yung may nakita rin kami doon na Arctodiaptomus dorsalis, which is halanoid copepod that is endemic to Central and South America. Na nakita rin namin sa Lake Lanao, and wala na kaming nakita nung native, nung endemic species ng Calanoid copepod sa Lake Lanao. In Lake Taal, nandun na rin yung Arctodiaptomus dorsalis na yon. Pero the thing with Lake Taal, in the records, wala naman previous na native Calanoid copepod except for one, yung Arctodiaptomus bremi, na nakikita rin namin sa Lake Taal. Pero parang nagko-coexist sila nung A. dorsalis. Ang pinagkaiba lang probably, may preference sa mas malalalim na waters yung T. bremi. Kaya siya nagko-coexist with A. dorsalis. Pero in other lakes, pag meron na ng A. dorsalis na yan, nawawala na yung native inhabitant na Calanoid copepod. So, hindi namin siya alam dati.
Dr. Rey, yung introduced na plankton sa Lake Lanao, what do you think is the most probable parang pathway of introduction? Considering na you said that it's found in Central America, so paano sila na-introduce din?
Well, probably nakarating siya dito because of the aquarium trade.
Aquarium, yeah.
And then eventually probably nakarating siya sa Laguna de Bay. Sa Laguna de Bay siya unang nakita na informally, no, sa records ng LLPA, early 90s. And then, posibleng kumalat na siya sa ibang mga lakes na may aquaculture. Dahil syempre, Laguna de Bay is the center of tilapia. Yung nagpo-produce sila ng mga tilapia fingerlings, no? Dinadala sa iba-ibang lakes para i-feed naman dun sa mga lakes na yon for their cages or their pens. So, pwedeng pag kumuha ka na ng tubig, basta meron na nung Calanoid copepad doon, nadala mo na sa bagong lugar, ayun na ano na siya. So, we call it an unseen invader. Kasi nga, hindi mo siya makikita kaagad unless meron kang microscope at i-examine mo lahat ng tubig na gagaling dun sa lake. So, ang dali-dali niyang ikalat. So, ayun, widespread na siya. And sa records namin, kung saan common ang aquaculture ng mga lakes, dun siya nakikita. So pag hindi masyadong common ng aquaculture, hindi siya ganun ka nakikita. And mahilig pati siya sa mas eutrophic na waters. So ang ganda ng combination.
Actually.
Karamihan ng lakes natin na may aquaculture, nagiging eutrophic in the long run. So nagiging very suitable habitats sila para dun sa mga Calanoid copepods na yan. So we're still continuing our studies. We want to understand more aspects of its biology and how it spreads further and how it affects really yung aquatic biodiversity sa ibang freshwater ecosystems natin.
So Dean Rey, para lang sa mga audiences natin at para sa akin din na hindi masyadong familiar sa freshwater biodiversity, may common name or may common term ba to describe copepods para at least meron lang parang yung malaman ng general audience kung ano yung copepods.
Yung copepods in general, wala siyang common name in Filipino. Pero yung mas kilala even among aquarium hobbyists, no, yung Daphnia na sinasabi. May social media post ako recently na lumabas din sa Philippine Planktology page about Daphnia. Pero wala talaga tayong Daphnia sa Pilipinas. Pero siguro sa mga general zoology books natin, di ba, usually model organism for order Cladocera would be Daphnia. Pero wala yun sa Pilipinas. Very common, basta water flea sa Pilipinas, tinatawag nilang Daphnia o kaya Dapia. No? Pero actually, it belongs to a different genus. It's Moina. More often than not, yung mga sinasabi nilang Daphnia dito, belongs to a different genus, Moina. Pero since mas kilala nga yung salitang Daphnia or Dapia, kahit sa bentahan, no, yun ang tawag nila. Pero more often than not, it turns out to be a totally different
okay.
altogether.
Alright, so isi-search ko yan mamaya. So may question lang tayo from Facebook. So may question dito from Ravindra Joshi. Ang question na to I think is directed to Dr. Armi. Yung what are the pathways for invasive fish species in Lake Lanao?
Yun, based sa mga literature, sad to say, parang si he's Indian, so I have to speak English. Hi, sir. Joshi, I'm Armi from Fish Cake.
Hi, Dr. Joshi.
Yeah. The pathway, mainly through, according to literature, it was accidentally introduced through stacking of fry enhance fisheries production. So 1960s and 1970s, there were introductions of or stocking of milkfish, fry, and tilapia. Yeah. So that's it. Pathway for it. And I don't discount na it's not used as aquarium fish. So most likely it is due to stocking of fry or to improve the fisheries production in Lake Tano. These are, sad to say, these are government initiated efforts.
Para sa
The
food security po.
lesson is we should do risk assessment before any
Before
enhancement,
releasing.
and we should be careful of, just like what Ray said, the tag along species. Tag along meaning you don't they are you don't intend to bring them there, but you were not able to detect na they were there. So we should be careful. So that's why, and I think it's a big no that if we have a lot of endangered species, that risk assessment should be done first, because endemic species are very vulnerable to extinction because they are only found there.
All right.
Okay, I answered you, Dr. Joshi.
Okay, so ayan, we have a follow-up. Actually, hindi follow-up. We have a question naman, for Doc Aimee. So, Doc Aimee, have you observed daw if invasive alien species na arthropods sa backyard mo? Tapos, common questions ba yun ng mga plantitos and plantitas?
Yung invasive alien species sa backyard, wala naman masyado kasi very small scale ang operations natin sa backyard. But just recently, before the lockdown, may isang invasive alien species na pumasok sa atin, which was also a moth. Ito yung parang caterpillar siya that eats our corn. So, na-threaten yung corn industry natin dyan. It came from Africa. Tapos, nakarating siya all the way to Asia. So, ganun siya katibay na even quarantine will not work kasi this is a flying insect. Paano mo haharangan yung bagay na lumilipad? So, now, I think for the future studies, titingnan din saan siya galing ngayon. Yung bang nakikita sa Mindanao ay galing sa Malaysia, yung bang nasa north was from Taiwan. So yun yung ititrace natin ngayon so that we could track down the pest more efficiently. But we cannot remove that here anymore. Basta andito na siya. Yun yung tinatawag nating fall armyworm. Oo. Pero sa forest systems, fortunately, wala namang nakakapasok so far na invasive species threatening our arthropods. But again, it's too soon to tell kasi with arthropods being such a large group, we don't really know who's entering and who is still our residents. Unlike other organisms dito sa Pilipinas that we have very good databases. Ang dami pa rin kasi nating matututunan dito sa mga arthropods. So, yun din yung isang butas doon. We have to also show evidence that they are native to our country or endemic to our country and not introduced. Nasa atin pa rin yung burden of proof. And the only time we could do that is kung meron tayong efficient na
So, yun pala
inventory.
isa sa mga gaps sa study on arthropods. Wala pong masyadong database na nagko-collate ng mga data on them.
Meron na naman, but it's still not enough kasi there are really very few of us. Most that study arthropods ay talaga magkakakilala. With spiders, we have hobbies like yung mga may interest talaga. Like nakikita ko dito si Darrell Acuna. He looks at tarantulas. Yung iba naman, halos kamag-anak mo na. Nag-aaral din ng ibang arthropods. Tatay ko, I inherited the field from my parents. Yung iba mga kumpare mo na. It's really a small world studying a very big group. So talaga marami pang kailangan gawin.
Ayan, sa mga estudyante na nanonood, kailangan natin ng mga next liners na magsa-study ng arthropods. Alright. So may follow-up, may next question pala tayo from Facebook, from Willem Tan. So I think this is aimed sa ating mga freshwater specialists. This is about those extinct species na barbodes. If these barbodes were found again, would a captive breeding program be implemented immediately?
Yes, that's what we recommended. Captive breeding, stock enhancement, and if possible, this assisted colonization. That this was done for Sinarapan. If you are aware, Sinarapan almost they were almost this wipe out. So they the people working on Sunarapan, they implemented assisted colonization. Ibig sabihin nun, parang you translocate, you transfer, you just assist the species to magpopulate doon for conservation purposes. Kasi iniiwasan natin um, yung mga threats na nandoon siya sa, for example, sa Lake Buhi, merong aquaculture, merong ano pang mga issues doon, Ray. So tinatransfer siya they transferred it to mountain lakes na away from those threats. So I hope yun yung immediate. Kung may makita tayong extant individuals, we recommend for captive breeding. Tapos pag mag-succeed yan, siguro magkaroon na yan. Parang you cannot with the proliferation and dominance of invasive species in Lake Tanaw, hindi siya applicable na mag stock enhancement ka sa Lake Tanaw, kakainin lang ng mga ng mga invasive. So ang naisip namin ni Dr. Guerrero, si Dr. Guerrero is part of the team, no, is talaga parang consider assisted colonization. Pero taking into account na hindi na naman natin maulit yung Lake Lanao issue kasi syempre parang translocation din yan, di ba? Parang i-transfer din siya sa ibang water bodies.
Mhm.
So kailangan talaga ng thorough studies, mga feasibility studies. So I think meron naman tayong yung College of Fisheries, they have capability to do that. So kailangan natin talaga makita siya and funding na para to support that research.
Okay. Alright. So, meron dito interesting question. So, siguro gagawin ko na lang general to instead of making it specific to tilapia. So, Ravindra Joshi has a question. So, una siguro, let's take the perspective of those working on terrestrial species. Si Prof. Philip, siguro, if you can start. So, how do you balance the economic benefits from other adverse effects of invasive species? Kasi ang original question sa tilapia. So for terrestrial species naman, how do you balance the economic benefits from other adverse effects of invasive species? And ang follow-up ay, how do you then convince policymakers on introduction and promotion of other invasive species naman?
Well, to begin with, you have to identify which are these invasive species, vertebrate species that could have a potential or has been benefiting humans in terms of food as a food source. Of course, rodents. I mean, you need to balance out the equation. You have to determine ano ba yung trade-offs. If you want to parang payabungin mo yung mga invasive species, ano ba yung trade-offs? What will happen? And is it really cost-effective? I mean, if you can, let's say, for example, as sustenance or as a protein source, I mean, marami namang alternative dyan. I mean, commercially available, manok or poultry. Yeah, swine. Yeah, definitely. It's already been established, and it's an established industry. So I'm not even sure which are these invasive species are that can have the potential para magkaroon ng, let's say, food security. Daga, palaka, and in some instances, itong mga invasive talaga, they really cause they really wreak havoc with talaga. It's been for me, it's non-negotiable for me. And in the long run, siguro the trade-offs will be very, very swing to the other scale of the balance. It's not a very it's probably not a worthwhile endeavor to pursue. So just maintain the status quo of trying to target these invasive alien species. Kasi sa vertebrates, ano mo pag-uusapan natin dito, mga rodents, yung marine toad, isa pa yan, ilang beses na nakapag-displace ng mga native species. And not just for frogs, but reptiles, even birds. So, they're bad news. I mean, walang mabuting ikadudulot ng mga yan. Magkaroon ka pa ng sakit doon sa mga rodents, leptospirosis. I, for one, had already leptospirosis. It wasn't very, very pretty, actually. So yun, mga ganun tipo. I'm sure for other for fish definitely that there are some
Ako personally, I don't recommend talaga introductions, no, unless it is really important. Like for example, what happened to Sinarapan. Um, in fish base, we have developed a tool. Ma-predict niya yung yung establishment ng isang species sa isang country. So my point here is before ka mag-introduce, you research kung ano ang mga sad stories ng mga ibang countries. So kung meron ng mga failures yung mga countries na na-introduce itong species tapos na wipe out, invasive siya, why do we have to follow them? Bakit parang ganon? So actually yung tilapia, if you look at the database ng mga ng invasive species, kasama siya sa mga invasive species, and we are parang stocking tilapia everywhere. So the best way is to talaga para ma-prevent yung invasive species is to do yes, to do more research kung ano yung impact niya, kung merong mga mga reported parang invasion na nangyari, and then um, do risk assessment if if kailangan talagang mag-introduce, mag-risk assessment ka, and and uh, uh, yeah, that's it. And you can siguro other groups, no, they can create, they can develop parang tools to predict yung establishment ng isang species pag pinasok niyo sa Philippines, anong mangyari. Yung tools namin, yan, based yun sa mga biological traits ng species. So kung siya, kung predator ba siya, kung highly fecund species ba siya, yung ganun, kung reproducing ba siya all throughout the year. Alam mo yung ganun, wide-ranging siya kung ang species niya, ay ako ang temperature, ako nakikita siya sa parang like for example, kung circumglobal siya. So ang laki ng chance niya na talaga siya, mag-establish siya if you introduce that species to a particular area.
Nice. Okay. So, punta naman po tayo sa invertebrates, sa freshwater, tapos sa arthropods naman. So, how about you, Doc Aimee? Meron bang ganung perspective? Meron bang mga efforts to introduce invasive species for economic values?
So far, wala naman talagang invasives for economic value. But we do have, for example, pet trade, hobby, which could potentially become the source of invasive alien species. Ang sinasabi lang natin is, if you really love these organisms, either you have them recorded, properly be a responsible pet owner. But if you can really say no kasi we haven't really appreciated the ecosystem services provided by these arthropods. We haven't even recorded them so efficiently. Tapos, we are in a race to document them. Magsasama ka pa ng isa pang pwedeng magtanggal sa kanila. And like any other invasive, kaya nga siya bad news, katulad sinasabi ni Sir Philip, is that we have no way of removing them in a system once they enter this. Kaya nga sila invasive. They're really that annoying na kahit gusto mo na siyang tanggalin, hindi mo na siya matatanggal sa system kasi they thrive and compete with our native species. Yun yung problema doon. Kaya as much as possible, we implore you that while there are so many arthropods around, we do not wait for the day that we lose them. It's enough that they're affected by climate change. Huwag na nating dagdagan yung problema nila by decimating them. Kasi baka yung mga bagay that we are enjoying right now, like pollination services, would eventually become unavailable later on. Ngayon, we get that for free. Just imagine if we're now paying for pollination services. A third of your food comes from pollinators. And we haven't really known kung ano ba yung mga bagay na nakakaapekto sa kanila. Tapos dadagdagan pa natin ng invasive alien species. So medyo mahirap yun.
Tama po. Okay, so kunin naman natin perspective sa sa freshwater na invertebrates.
Well, I share Amy's sentiments on that, no. Hindi pa nga natin talaga alam ano yung meron. And gaya na sinabi niya kanina, ang konti na nagwo-work, ang konti na nag-aaral in my field, no, doing freshwater zooplankton. Basically, it's me, a few established retired scientists already, and basically my students who are doing work. And then yung discovery ng isang invasive, no? By accident pa nga yun eh. Kasi hindi namin siya ini-expect. Tapos hindi namin siya ma-identify using our keys. Yun pala, kaya siya hindi ma-identify dahil hindi siya dito nakikita sa region natin. No? Tapos sisingitan mo pa ng among others. No? Tapos we're still discovering a lot of interesting native species or new records. In Lake Taal, for instance, meron kaming 5 new records doon ng copepods na in other parts of the world, they are found in marine or brackish water environments. Tapos sa Taal, nakikita siya inside the lake. No? And that points to the unique origin of Lake Taal being formerly open to the sea. Tapos, yan, magkakaproblema ka pa with invasives. Pero on the other hand, pwede rin tayong maging source ng invasive freshwater invertebrates. You remember the story of the Manila clam, no, yung corbicula, na nung nakarating na sa Amerika, it's a very invasive biofouler in the Great Lakes area, etc. So, pwedeng tayo rin yung nagiging source. Kasi kulang din tayo sa pag-iingat ng kung paano tayo ko-control, no, ng ating mga flora and fauna dito na pag nakarating sa ibang lugar, nagiging problema din naman nila. So, it goes both ways kasi. So, we need really more people studying, monitoring, being serious with the work para maka-progress tayo with our efforts to conserve and better manage our freshwater and terrestrial resources.
All right. So ang gandang last na response do sa question na binigay ni Sir Ravinda Joshi. Okay, so medyo challenging talaga, no? Ang dami nating na-identify na challenges for 2020. And I really hope na we learned a lot from our experiences and we can work on building a better future. So, ilang araw na lang, 2021 na. Ano yung sa tingin nyo? At least last na na natin to before we end this talk. So, for 2021, what do you think is in store for us? So, ano yung mga issues na kailangan nating bigyan ng atensyon? Tapos, ano yung mga exciting projects nyo na pwedeng i-watch out natin for 2021? So, we can start with Prof. Philip.
Well, marami kasi nabinben during this pandemic for 2020. So, marami din mga proposals na submitted for bat virus research. So essentially, field surveillance. Kasi, well, the reason na mabilis nakita with the SARS-CoV-2, yung nearest relative ng virus with the bats is because they've already done a massive scale of survey of bat virus previously. So we want to do that here in the Philippines. So we want to replicate that as well. And at the very least, may mga 4 kami proposals to do that. Some within the island of Luzon, some all over the Philippines, and some gumawa kami ng proposals forecasting saan ba yung possible na mga hotspot areas na mataas yung spillover ng bat virus to humans. So we'll be doing that. And meron din kami kasi previously kasi yung bat virus research sa Pilipinas is foreign driven. Marami mga of course ating mga kaibigan, mga colleagues from different countries. We've also, so with this, meron kami proposed within the UP system from UP Mindanao, UP Diliman, UP Los Baños. So we will do a field surveillance, longitudinal surveillance of several high-impact viruses like coronavirus, Henipa virus, and possibly may mga Ebola viruses as well. So titingnan namin sa mga different important bat sites in the Philippines, and titingnan din namin kung yung mga we will look out for spillover events. Ano ba yung mga nag-influence ng mga viral shedding and spillover events to humans. So very, very exciting, and I believe na just malaking impact to public health. So para magkaroon tayo ng monitoring, para magkaroon tayo ng ma-preempt natin yung the next emergence of a pandemic, kung magkataon meron dito sa Pilipinas, we'll be well equipped to na malaman natin anong posible na pagmumulan nito.
Ayos yan, para mahanda tayo. Okay, so Doc Aimee, can you share your forecast naman for 2021?
I'm still waiting for funding for a few projects, pero we are working on the approval of a project looking at provisional services provided by arthropods like insects, paano siya kinakain as alternative food sources, tying up culture also, how these insects are perceived in society, not just in social media, pati sa mga pamahiin, yun, itatay up natin yun. And then, I'm also doing projects for kids kasi if I cannot target the adults to change their mindset, sa bata na ako nagre-recruit to train them well, to organize them, do capacity building work. Sa cave arthropods, hopefully, kung malift na yung mga restrictions, we can now go back to the field and enter the caves and do what we do kasama si Sir Philip. Kasi kung kailan kami nakakuha ng pera, saka nagkaroon ng restriction, di naman kami makalakad ngayon. We have so many money pero hindi kami makapag-field work. Diba? We're raring to go collect more arthropods from the field and check if arthropogenic disturbances are affecting their populations. Kasi may binabantayan kaming species na nakita na namin noon. We're not really sure with tourism coming into the caves, yung mga nag-spelunking, may effect ba yun sa kanila? So yun yung mga bagay na tinitingnan ko ngayon. I'm trying to focus on human-arthropod interactions.
Ayan, so yun yung mga abangan natin for arthropods naman for 2021. Okay, so punta naman po tayo kay Doc Armi. Ano naman po yung may expect natin for
Ako, I can only share to you what will be happening for 2021 and beyond for aquatic species. So, sa institution ko, yung quantitative aquatics, we are commissioned by IUCN to do global assessment of freshwater fishes native in the Philippines. So, we were able to assess new assessments to 67 species ng and then sadly more than 50% of this out of these 67 species are threatened. And then we were also able to do reassessments and reassessments of 37 species, and these are under review by IUCN. So if I check the statistics of IUCN, there are more than 4,000 species occurring in the Philippines na ang assessment niya ay outdated. Outdated na ibig sabihin mula 1996 pa siya na-assess. And marami dito ay endemic. So yung mga students ninyo, yung mga researchers natin, mga conservationists natin na gustong parang kailangan natin tong pagtuunan ng pansin, let's assess its current status para natin kung ano na ang status nila at para mabigyan natin sila ng yung protective measures. For example, yung sinarapan, ang sinarapan, 'di ba, very iconic 'yan. Actually 1996 pa siya last na assessed at saka lower risk, conservation dependent siya. Pero actually nung ni-reassess namin with before Doc Vic passed away, hindi na siya vulnerable siya, threatened siya. So marami pa 4,000 yan na nasa occurring in the Philippines, maybe mga endemic siya. So yun yung So yung trabaho namin sa Aquatics will be published in the next IUCN update by first quarter of 2021, and then of course this is possible in partnership with Philippine Aquatic Red List Committee through the Freshwater Bonyfish group. And going so ang next ko na for the aquatic, we have this Philippine Aquatic Red List Committee. Siya parang created to ng DA under the jurisdiction ng BIFAR and FRDI. So meron siyang 10 subcommittees comprising siguro mga roughly 140 to 150 members, mga volunteers to. Wala kami sweldo niyan. So yan, parang from marine bony fishes, mga pelagic, mga sharks, mga invertebrates, aquatic snakes, marine plants, plankton, ornamental organisms. So ako member ako sa freshwater and sa ornamental. And anong activities namin in the coming years? Kasi ganun din kami, may funding din kami, hindi din kami nakalabas. So we are conducting regular planning and assessment workshops at the national level, tsaka subcommittee level. So may mga subcommittees kami na nagmi-meet din kami regularly at saka nag-a-assess kami. Then we will conduct parang collections of para makakuha kami ng field data kasi ang problem namin, ang challenge talaga namin sa red list assessment ay walang information on population size and trends and threats. So unknown yung threats. So kung hindi mo alam yon, hindi ka lalabas sa field, hindi mo siya ma-assess kung anong status of threat niya. And then we hope to publish this year and the coming years on parang red list of Philippine aquatic parang ganon, red list of Philippine aquatic
species.
So
Okay.
that's all. And of course, yes, for Lake Lanao, I hope na merong thorough survey in Lake Lanao to locate extant individuals. And yun, we recommend captive breeding, stock enhancement, assisted colonization, IEC para ma-increase yung to increase community awareness and participation, and study the feasibility, conduct feasibility study to eradicate the yung invasive alien species. And thank you to NRCP because NRCP ay invested money para maaral yung Lake Lanao. Bakit po kailangan nag-invest sa Lake Lanao? Sayang. Anyway, we hope for more funding for Lake Lanao in the coming years. Please sa mga donors, I'm appealing kasi most of the most of the Maranaos are poor. So with the unstable fisheries, nawala yung source of income, livelihood, mas mahirap yung buhay nila. So that's it. Thank
Okay.
you.
Yan, I hope wala na tayong makita mga susunod na extinctions kasi napakalungkot ng extinctions na nabalita this year. Alright, so last but not the least, si Dean Rey. Ano yung fearless forecast natin for 2021?
Well, hopefully we get to begin samplings for our 2 projects. One is dealing with 3 of the 7 lakes in San Pablo, Yambo, Pandin, and Calibato. No? And then, kasi we're studying the amount of methane in the lakes, related to, of course, eventually impacts on climate change, etc. So, itinutuloy lang namin yung study na sinimulan ng isang former PhD student ko together with our collaborators from Taiwan and Japan. And then now we're going to look into greater detail into the dynamics ng methane storage and then emission in those lakes. And then another is, of course, our work on Lake Taal, wherein, as I mentioned earlier, where we hope to do some post-eruption ecological research, focusing on food webs of a representative littoral and limnetic species. So, yung tawilis yung isa, and then yung Glossogobius guris yung isa. Utilizing different techniques like stable isotope analysis, etc. Of course, for this coming year, I would be heavily dependent on my very efficient research group, my graduate students. Maraming naisulat ngayong 2020 na sana, iba na-publish na, pero sana iba ma-publish pa ng 2021. So nananawagan ako sa mga estudyante ko, magsulat pa kayo ng mas mabuti. Kasi hirap din ako harapin ng kamukha nung dati yung pagsusulat because of my current responsibilities in the university. So, ayun. But I have a good team and I'm very fortunate to have worked with such a hardworking group of students. So, pinapalakas ko loob nyo nananawagan ako magsulat pa kayo. So, ayun. Maraming salamat.
Okay, medyo natamaan ako doon kasi ayan, nasa writing phase na rin ako ng thesis ko. So siguro fearless forecast ko, ma-share ko na rin. Sana matapos ko na rin yung manuscript ko at makagraduate na this coming sem. All right. So siguro last words na lang from our uh, invited guest. Kung meron dito sa mga viewers na mga bata pa at hindi pa sure kung ano yung tatahakin nilang career sa future, paano nyo sila bibigyan ng interes na sumunod sa inyong mga yapak in 1 to 2 sentences? Ayan, let's start with kay Prof. Philip.
Total, mahilig kayong mag-explore ng inyong mga lugar. Gawin yung trabaho yan. Maraming mga exciting na mga lugar na pwede pa nating puntahan at marami tayong pwede madiscover. At hindi ka naman maghihirap dito. Sigurado. Pwede ka naman maging rocket scientist. No, joke. Joke.
Alright.
Yeah, pursue your dreams.
Sige, si Doc Aimee.
Siguro, as kids kasi, we have often loved arthropods. Hindi ko lang alam kung sang stage nawawala yung pag-ibig na yun eh. Pero sana you rekindle that love for the study of arthropods even as you grow up. Kasi we need all the help that we can get. Lalo na in systematics and taxonomy.
Alright. Sige, so Doc Armi?
Paano ba to? Siguro help each other to save our biodiversity, and I encourage yung mga young ones to help us parang assess the current status of our species. So there's so many things to do, wala lang mga researchers. Thank
Alright,
you.
and lastly, Doc Rey?
For me, malaking bagay yung mahal mo yung ginagawa mo. So, dara doon sa mga kagaya namin na ginagawa na to, sana masustain pa yon. And then, para naman dun sa mga mag-aaral na inaalam pa lang din kung ano yung gagawin nila. Pagka nagkaroon kayo ng inkling na interesting tong bagay na ginagawa natin, pag-aaral ng kalikasan, pag-aaral ng mga hayop at halaman, sundan niyo siya, and you will find yourself rewarded in more than financially. May ambag ka sa bayan na ginagawa yung agham na inaral mo. Pero yun nga, gaya sabi ni Prof. Philip, hindi mo naman yung kapaghihirap ito, basta siguraduhin mo na masipag ka and then nandun yung passion mo, it can all fall into its proper place. So, yun.
Okay. Maraming salamat. So siguro i-share ko na rin since konti pala experience ko being a wildlife biologist. Siguro ang masishare ko na lang sa mga hindi pa sigurado, stay curious. Yun. Wag nyo lang aalisin yung pagiging curious sa sarili nyo kasi eventually mahanap yung interest nyo. Kasi lagi kang magtatanong, ano yan? Lagi mong gustong matuto kung ano man yung makikita mong interest mo. Okay, so I hope nakinig yung mga audiences natin at may mga nainganyo tayo na maging mga field biologist at sumali sa ating larangan. So yan, maraming salamat po mga ma'am, mga sir, at sa lahat ng mga na-share nyo ngayong gabi. Ayan, on behalf of BCSP, thank you for being part of Wild Brews. Sana may next time ulit. So of course, we also want to thank our friends and thank you sa What the Health Foods at sa Nipa Brew craft beer for my brew tonight. Ito, masarap siya. Ayan, so let's support our local entrepreneurs. So thank you everyone for listening in tonight. Sana marami tayong napulot ng mga aral sa mga nangyari ngayong taon. We really hope na at nananalangin na ang 2021 ay mas maging maayos at better year, not just for the Philippines, but also for the entire planet. Yan. We would also like to remind everyone to like our Facebook page, follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel and Spotify. So, doon nyo makikita yung replay nitong Wild Brews episode na ito, kung hindi nyo man siya napanood ngayon. And again, thank you everyone. Before we end, let's cheers to all our achievements and accomplishments. And of course, lahat ng lessons na nalaman natin for this year, despite yung surprise ng 2020. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and may we have a better 2021. Cheers po.
Cheers.
Happy holidays. Uh-huh.